Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for staying for our afternoon sessions today. I want to thank all of the participants and the discussants today. I think we've had a very fruitful and deep discussion on Russia's rupture and a post-Russia future for the many nations and participants and activists here today. I want to give a special thanks to Ukrainian Member of Parliament Oleg Dunda and Ilya Ponomarev for a very fruitful lunch discussion. I think they brought up some very important points that I think we should take away with us to our respective corners of the earth and to help these nations and these people in need. So our panel today is on the European perspective of a post-Russia future and how European countries and others can help in those movements. My name is Joseph Bebel. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Eurasia Daily Monitor at the Jamestown Foundation and the senior program associate for our Russia and Eurasia program. And before I move into introducing my distinguished panelists whose experience and expertise far outweigh my own, I did want to put in a shameless plug for two of Jamestown's most recent books. The first being from our senior fellow, Janusz Bugajski, who we were all, had the privilege of hearing from earlier today. His book, Failed State, A Guide to Russia's Rupture, is the most comprehensive book of its kind that looks into what will happen with Russia's rupture within Russia, as well as the surrounding regions and in Europe. And in a lot of ways, Janusz's book is a guide for how we should look at and expect and prepare for Russia's rupture. And the second book is from another one of our senior fellows, Thomas Kent, How Russia Loses, Hubris and Miscalculation in Putin's Kremlin. Tom does an excellent job of going into a number of case studies that show that the Kremlin, more often than not, tends to shoot itself in the foot. And we in the West and elsewhere should do more to try to capitalize on those situations. And in many ways, the actions of Putin's Kremlin is set the foundation for Russia's rupture. Both books are available for purchase or the free PDFs on Jamestown website. And I encourage you all to read them, as in many ways those books lay out what we are discussing today. And so now I'd like to turn to our panel for today. And I would ask our panelists to try to keep their remarks to about 5-6 minutes so that we can have time for questions later today. And so to begin with, I'd like to turn to the gentleman to my right, Pavel Ivlev, who's an attorney of law and executive director of Chris Poliskola, a nonprofit organization with offices in Riga, Latvia, and Brooklyn, New York. Since 2021, Mr. Ivlev has dedicated much of his time and efforts at the House of Ingria in Narva, Estonia, where he serves as a director. And so, Pavel, we'll turn to you. And we discussed briefly before the panel that the geographic, sort of borders of Ingria have been set out, have been taken care of. But you mentioned that more needs to be done to sort of develop consciousness within the Ingrians themselves. And could you speak more to that?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Joseph. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to talk here and to be a representative of Ingria. And I'm sure not all of you know what it is. So it's a part of Russian Federation at the moment. That was part of Russian Federation, which is the region surrounding St. Petersburg. So you can sort of figure out by the map where it is. It's on the Baltic Sea. It's basically southeast and eastern side of the Baltic. So it's the size of the territory is more or less the size of Austria, and the population is also about the same. So it's around 10 million people lives there. So this is the land today still called and named after Vladimir Lenin. So it's Leningradskaya Oblast, Leningrad region, and obviously a lot of people just hate to repeat this name. So the historic name of this land is Ingria or Ingermanland, just Swedish name because this land was first known as a part of Swedish kingdom, Kingdom of Sweden. And it was conquered by Peter the Great in the beginning of the 18th century. Since then, it's Russia. But it has its own name, historic one, which we were proud to promote, and this is the main thing we're trying to bring to the audience. And basically, unfortunately, not even every citizen of Ingermanlandia knows the name of the historic land. So that's one of the points we're trying to promote, that, look, this is your land, this is its name, and this is its history, because it's all been missing. The other burden we are facing, probably the key one, there is no such a nation as Ingermanland people. There used to be several people who lived in the region, and probably the majority at the time was the so-called Finns of Ingermanland. So these were Finnish people moved to that part of, at that time, Sweden, and who lived there. And there used to be a lot of them, but then Soviet regime started to fight these people and basically annihilate their lives and burn or close the churches. They are Lutheran. So at the moment, the percent of this people of Ingermanlandia, I'm talking about, who used to live on that land before Russia started to reshape everything, is probably less than 1%. So there is no national identity compared to Tatarstan or Bashkirstan or Ichkeria. That's the reality. On the other hand, modern nationalist theories, they all teach us that it's not that relevant for the political nationalism or political nations of today's world. So our task is to basically to create this new political nation of people of Ingermanlandia. So that's what we are trying to do. Of course, it's very difficult to move with such ideas inside Russian Federation today. So we're trying to do it from outside. And our location is in Narva, Estonia. Narva is the most eastern city of the European Union. It's less than 200 kilometers to St. Petersburg, and a little more from Tallinn, which is the capital of Estonia. So it's really a hill facing the Russian Federation, where we want to to show the people to the east that they can have a different state.
Thank you, Pavel. I definitely think something to be aware of is that there's a spectrum here in terms of the consolidation of these national movements that we're discussing today. And as Pavel pointed out, sometimes there's a bit more work that is needed to sort of galvanize these publics and bring them together. And I appreciate your insights there. And I think I can think of no better follow-up to that than with my gentleman to the left, Oliver Lud, who is the managing director at the Uralic Center, an Estonian NGO that focuses on protecting and promoting the rights of indigenous people. In particular, Finno-Ugric and Samoyedic people. He is a member of the advisory, and he is also a member of the advisory committee of the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. We discussed briefly before the panel that for you, civil society organizations are really one of the drivers here. And we've talked quite a bit about some of the top-down perspectives here, but could you give us kind of a view of what's going on with some of these grassroots movements?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Hello, everybody. I would actually like to start by thanking Pavel for the great work he has done with this Ingrid house in Narva. I visited this house just on Sunday, 2 days ago, in Narva, and I think there's very good work being done there. So this Ingrid house has become a kind of a local cultural center for Finno-Ugric peoples of this region, the Baltic Finnic peoples. And this is quite remarkable in a city that is maybe 96 or 97% Russian speaking, though located in Estonia. And I think the work that Pavel has supported and led is actually very important and strategic for our country as well. So thank you for that. As for these grassroots perspectives, well, I can say that I represent one civil society organization in Estonia called the Relic Center, yes. And my main point is that I believe that civil society, as opposed to formal authorities in Europe, have an opportunity, but more than that, a kind of a moral responsibility to work towards Russia's decolonization. Simply put, our formal authorities have not gotten their Russia strategy right. Yet, this is an issue of our existential importance. So in my country, Estonia, for example, which is very pro-Ukraine, which is quite hawkish towards Russia, there is much talk by our authorities in our media about the Russian threat. The threat, of course, is real, and it is probably growing. But most of this media discourse, including statements by authorities, focus on how to somehow contain the threat, how to deter Russia, how to, as it were, raise the cost of aggression in the future against our country. For example, by increasing national defense spending. Initially, it was from 2% to 3% of the GDP. Now there is talk maybe even raising it higher. I would say this is a kind of a symptom relief strategy. And maybe this is a correct focus for the short and medium term. But clearly, this does not address the root cause of this Russian threat. For some reason, there is a reluctance to ask among authorities, what would it take to eliminate this Russian threat for good? But in my view, we should precisely discuss, and not just discuss, but more importantly, plan how to eliminate the root cause of the Russian threat, which of course is the colonial and imperial structure of the Russian state, and not even just a particular regime. The threat is structural, it is not personal, not even ideological. But for some reason, here in the, let's say, the public discourse, it is as if some kind of Foucauldian limits of discourse are reached. And we do not hear that. Even in a country like Estonia, that quite recently itself liberated itself from essentially Russian Empire. So this is why this decolonization of Russia is such an important idea for both the peoples colonized by Russia, but also for its neighbors like Estonia and many other states in Europe. And here I believe the civil society has a particular role. Why? To fill this gap in discourse, but also I think civil society can do certain things that authorities cannot. We can be more independent. We do not necessarily have to align by some kind of written or unwritten agreements. We do not have to align necessarily with the existing EU policy or other allies or partners. We can speak our mind, and we can also be more creative. One speaker before said that maybe there is this failure of imagination in the West, and I believe that is the case, and civil society can be more creative and innovative. Now, how can civil society perform this role? I propose two key directions. One is to push the public discourse about the future of today's Russia, and secondly, to offer practical support for the movement of decolonizing Russia. First, pushing this public discourse. As civil society, we do not have formal power, but we have still one powerful tool at our disposal, and this is the word. Written word, spoken word. This is something that we can use in various ways. In a democratic state, in theory, this word by the civil society could also influence the thinking of our elected representatives and public officials. Secondly, I believe in a country like Estonia, but also other states, on on the level of authorities eventually, our states should support this movement of decolonizing Russia much more explicitly and much more strongly. And of course, decolonizing Russia should be led primarily by the peoples suffering from that colonization. They must themselves want to remove those colonial shackles. But the West, including the civil society, cannot remain a passive bystander. It can and should play a constructive role by supporting this decolonial movement of Russia in various ways. And by offering at least moral support, by various expressions of solidarity, but more importantly, practical support. This could be intellectual support, technical assistance, for example, by sharing experiences of past decolonial struggles, for example, by countries like mine, Estonia, sharing experiences of nation building, but also I believe we can offer material, including financial support for those decolonial movements. So one example is my own organization, Uralic Center. We are very small. We don't even have salaried staff. But for the past 2 years, we have been doing what we can to support this decolonial movement. So in September 2022, Uralic Center hosted the Erzia National Congress in a southern Estonian town of Otepää. So Erzia is one of the Finno-Ugric peoples, traditionally living on territory of today's Russia. And this became a very important event. It certainly mobilized the Erzia national movement, but it also became a kind of an example or inspiration for many other national movements in Russia. And just 2 days ago, Uralic Center hosted the first Congress of the Free Nations League in the same town of Otepää. And now this was attended by approximately 10 national movements. The Congress adopted a charter, a resolution, bylaws, certain statements to compatriots, to the international community, and Estonian Parliament, Riigikogu. And this is just the last point I will make. That the statement to Riigikogu urged our Estonian Parliament to support decolonial processes in Russia, to support the right to self-determination of Russia's indigenous peoples, and most importantly, in my view, to urge the Estonian Parliament to set up an analogous parliamentary committee on cooperating with national movements of Russia's indigenous and small-numbered peoples, just like Ukraine's Verkhovna Rada has done, and what we heard previously from Mr. Oleg Dunda. Today, this is my firm conviction, Ukraine is the leader of Russia's decolonization. And this special committee that the Verkhovna Rada has set up is the prime example of that. It is actually amazing. A country that is at war manages to think so long-term, manages to find the political will to plan basically Russia's decolonization. And I would like my country and other EU states and basically the whole Western world to follow Ukraine's example, to set up analogous parliamentary committees, to cooperate with Ukraine, because it takes more than Ukraine to decolonize Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. I can definitely agree with that Ukraine is setting the example right now for how we can prepare for the future. In fact, Ukrainian civil society organizations have been quite pivotal in supporting the war effort, in sourcing funding for drones and other military equipment, and the support that they're receiving is allowing them to do so. And so I can agree with Oliver that I think formally we can provide more assistance to these organizations to be able to carry out, what they're doing. And I can definitely say as an editor, I agree with the statement that the word, both spoken and written, can be quite effective. And During Soviet times, the war for hearts and minds was something that we struggled with the Soviet regime. But ultimately, that is what triggered the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in many ways, I believe that will also be a part of Russia's rupture. And so, the more we can do to help these civil society organizations, I think the more we can move in the direction that we're hoping for at this conference today. And so now I would like to turn to our first online participant for this panel, Juraj Mesík from the Slovak Foreign Policy Association. After the fall of the Soviet Union, he held the position of chairman of the Green Party of Slovakia, was a member of the Federal Parliament in Prague, and director of the Department of the Federal Ministry of the Environment. He's the author of 6 books, 3 of which are about Russia and the Russians. Since 2023, he has served as an honorary consul of the government in exile of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. And so obviously, I think you'll be able to give us some background on what's going on in Ichkeria and what needs to be done there. But I'd also be curious to hear the view from Central Europe on Russia's rupture. We heard some concerning words from Oleg Dunda about what's currently going on in Hungary. And so in a lot of ways, the Central and Eastern European response to Russia's rupture will be important here. Yeah, I'll turn the time to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Let me open my PowerPoint. Where it is? Here it is. Okay. Well, we were actually asked to speak about a little bit different things. And it was what scenarios do you envisage and how should Russia's neighbors prepare to manage the process of Russia's disintegration? So that's what I would like to focus on. And the answer really very much depends on the answer to the key question, which is, will be Ukraine and Europe forced to defeat Russia alone without the United States of America? As we are, or you are meeting in Washington, I think this is the elephant in the room, which we need to discuss. And Ukraine certainly must plan for a scenario where the hypothetical scenario, nevertheless not impossible, that making Russia great again is fully victorious in America, as partially already is. Even without Trump in White House, U.S. retreats from the world history, becomes a kind of self-centric gerontocracy, changes from arsenal of democracy to just an arsenal. This, well, yeah, it would not be the first time in the human history that democracies failed to support other countries they promised to support. In Central Europe, we had Munich in 1938. We had phony war of 1939 when Poland was betrayed by the allies of Poland. Then in France in 1940, our parents and grandparents witnessed zero American support to defend against Nazi invasion. In the Battle of Britain, there were 0 US planes provided to defend the UK against bombing, and so on. And then, of course, December 11th, 1941 came when Hitler declared war against the United States, thanks God, because otherwise it's quite possible that the United States would just avoid the war in Europe and instead would fully focus on Japan. But that's just speculation. Nevertheless, by May 8th, 1948, over 225,000 Americans, probably more, were dead in Europe and Mediterranean, many more wounded. So does the European Union or the countries of EU and Ukraine have enough military strength to defeat Russia without United States of America? Well, the figures suggest that yes, even the NATO military budget without United States and minus Turkey, minus Hungary, even minus my own country, Slovakia, which behaves as it behaves, has a 2023 military spending together almost 5-1 compared to Russian military size. And qualitatively, the difference is even greater. So probably yes, Europe is demilitarized. Somebody was speaking about the peace dividend. I think it was Mr. Duda. But not quite entirely. Europe's share of global arms export is well over 30% recently, leading with France and followed by Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, Spain, and some smaller European countries. And some of those weapons are very advanced weapons which are exported and which are produced in Europe. So technologically, industrially, economically, there are resources to wage successful war against Russia or support Ukraine in waging that war, because to actually enter the war for Europeans is something we still avoid thinking about. Another measure, Global Firepower Index 2023, suggests something very similar. Europe is not totally powerless. Now, so Ukraine and Europe will win, but in a longer attrition war. And instead of quick, less devastating defeat of Muscovy, the consequences of such war will be very, very serious global consequences. I'm not talking about the local consequences, but global consequences. We know that Russian economy is highly flammable, and the map shows the yellow dots show the Russian refineries which were attacked by Ukrainian drones by mid-March. Yes, we know that there are some European and American politicians who, for gasoline cheaper, 30 cents cheaper, are willing to sacrifice tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives of Ukrainians. But eventually the Ukrainian politicians must make decision whom they are serving, whether they are serving the political interest of foreign politicians or the survival of Ukrainian nation. This is the map which shows drone reach map several weeks ago. We know that both Ust-Luga and Novorossiysk, which are the most important fuel export locations, the oil export terminals from Russia, are fully in the reach of Ukrainian drones. They are already in the reach of it. Now, Ukrainians are now producing drones which apparently have much longer reach. And so it appears to be a matter of political decisions of Ukrainian leaders which oil facilities, Russian oil facilities, will they attack and damage, eliminate. Now, the oil is obviously very important because it represents oil and other fuels. Most of the Russia's export incomes, and those export incomes finance the war against Ukraine. So by selling or by buying by buying Russian oil, those who buy it are financing killing of Ukrainian people. Now, another important source of Russian income is export of grains. We don't listen too much about that, but in 2023, over 43.5 for $500 million of dollars was Russia's gain from exporting grains. The map shows where the most important grain, the wheat, is produced in Russia, and it all is well. I mean, the most important wheat-producing regions of Russia are within the reach of Ukrainian drones, and are totally undefendable. And Ukrainians can learn from what Curtis LeMay did in 1945, just switching from strategic bombing of oil facilities, refineries, to strategic burning. That would have devastating global consequences. This is not a fantasy. This is something what was tested by real life. Maybe you remember fires of 2010. Those were spontaneous, but they also can be artificial. This is a real life experience. Wildfires, smoke cover in Moscow in summer 2010. Well, is it unhuman? Of course, but do we remember Dresden in February 1945? Do we remember Tokyo in March 1945? Not so many Britons, not so many Americans were dying, and certainly not civilians in those months. Yet, to protect the lives of American and British soldiers, these moves were done. And I'm avoiding discussing some other, which are very sensitive. But the important on this is these were completely conventional. Now, attrition war will further accelerate collapse of Russian infrastructure. We have seen this during the winter. We are seeing this right now in some regions of Russia where the dams are collapsing and the floods, which are natural, but assisted by the failure of infrastructure. Lack of maintenance will accelerate the breakdowns of water, gas, electricity networks, industrial disasters, power plants, chemical and other factories, large dams, and so on. So the long attrition war will be much more devastating than the quick war with help of the United States of America. Well, to avoid wild Yugoslavia type of collapse of Russia, Ukraine, and the West must prepare for Russia's upcoming disintegration. And we have seen some hypothetical possibilities for the breakdown. This is the one which is in my most recent book. Janusz Bugajski mentioned Chukotka as a territory which eventually could become part of United States of America. I suggest that territory should be actually greater and should also include Magadan region and Kamchatka region. That's the Chumaka territory on this map. Well, we could discuss about these scenarios a lot. Now, after the defeat, no unity holders can keep Russia together. The questions are how soon, how quickly, which way, and at what cost will Moscow disintegrate the Russian Empire. There certainly will be peacemakers, and they will do whatever possible to stop Ukraine from winning the war. And that's even without the corruption and other factors. There will be crowds of diplomats and politicians trying umirotvorit, to peacemake Ukraine with Kremlin. At least to force the ceasefire. We already heard about the ceasefire ideas, but that would only enable Moscow to regroup. So it's from a military perspective, from a Ukrainian perspective, a nonsense. A quick summary. After hypothetical departure of the United States from the world history, Ukraine and Europe can defeat Moscow in attrition war without the United States. Peremoga bude za nami. But attrition war consequences will be heavy and will be global. such a victory would come at a huge cost to humanity, possibly tens of millions of lives. The Arab world, Iran, and some other regions will sink to cause instability, something like Arab Springs on steroids. The China may be also seriously destabilized by such development. Or the territory east of Urals will effectively become part of China, under strong influence of China. Arctic Ocean may turn to North China Sea instead of Mare Nostrum of democracies. Nuclear armament of Poland, Ukraine, Turkey, Japan, Taiwan, and other countries could follow. Failure of United States of America to side with democracies. Its post-Russia economies and societies will be devastated. It will be a minefield of industrial disasters. Russia itself will disintegrate Yugoslavia away instead of velvet divorce of Czechoslovakia, which was proposed and discussed mostly during our morning session. And any remaining international credibility of United States will be lost, possibly in the credibility of US dollar, and so on and so on. Well, Washington, the choice is yours. If the eventual success of umиротворение would one more time confirm that there is the only thing that we learn from history, that we learn nothing from the history. And well, this is just my last map, which is the regional vulnerability to strategic burning, global food prices, and rise. And you see that the countries which are in red and orange and yellow colors, those are the most vulnerable. And in some of those regions, certainly the serious destabilization would follow. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for being a bit. I'm not. Well, let's call it pessimistic. Pessimistic about America. But 6 months of this of what's going on in Washington is just it. The imperative is that Ukrainians must start to think about winning the war without the United States of America. Sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. I certainly hope that we don't have to be that pessimistic, but I do have to agree that the time to act is now. In a lot of ways, Ukraine's ultimate victory over Russia and removing Russian forces from Ukraine's sovereign territory is perhaps one of the most important developments leading to a post-Russia future. And I really enjoyed what Ilya Ponomarev said earlier, that to become separate, we have to become more united. And in a lot of ways, I think we need to become more united behind the Ukrainian war effort if we want to help these national movements within today's Russia. And so now returning to our panel here in the room, I want to turn to Anders Osland of the Center for Social and Economic Research and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. And he will speak on some of the transforming attitudes in the region toward Russia.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And what we agreed upon is that I will talk about what has happened to the Nordic countries. So I will speak as a Swede rather than as an economist on Eastern Europe in this case. And there has been a fundamental transformation in all the four Nordic countries, moving from naivety with regard to Russia to domestic mobilization and very strong support for Ukraine. Currently, the countries outside of the Baltics that have a stronger support for Ukraine are Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. So they are very strongly pro-Ukrainian and similarly anti-Russian. So what has happened? After the Cold War, there was a far-reaching disarmament in the Nordic countries. Denmark has never been much of a military power, and Sweden disarmed very heavily. The country that stood firm with about 2% of GDP in military expenditure all along was Finland. Finland and Norway did not abolish conscription, which Denmark and Sweden did. And the most ridiculous thing that you see in all the Nordic countries, it is selling strategic assets to Russian companies. So even Finland here sold a number of strategic islands in the Gulf of Finland to Russian businessmen who had the habit of establishing helicopter platforms there. I wonder what you need a helicopter platform for there, particularly, given that you have great yachts to begin with. And Sweden sold its main aluminum plant to a good Russian company called Rusal, which was then sanctioned in 2018 with Elektripaska. So Sweden, together with Ireland, was then heavily lobbying the US to ease the sanctions on Rusal, because otherwise 2,000 jobs in northern Sweden would get lost. And Norway, not to be lost in this competition, managed to sell its main boat engine factory north of Bergen to Transmash Holding, the main producer of submarines in Russia, which was, of course, a very natural transaction. But some local journalists thought that this was not quite good. So he raised hell and managed to get the Norwegian parliament to adopt a law that prohibited this transaction. So it had to go back. So this is what the kind of naivety that has happened before. And there are many other examples of what has been sold. For example, Stockholm happened to give the management of the underground to a Chinese company, which is, of course, very good. So in price-wise, but there might be certain other problems. So now all the Nordic countries have woken up in this regard. Sweden and Denmark have reintroduced conscription, and all of them are fully up to increase military expenditure. Finland already had it, and the others are now going towards 2% of GDP at a fast speed. So the naivety is done with, the popular opinion is right. And then we come to NATO membership. Sweden has been neutral or outside of alliances since the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. So that is a rather long time. And in Sweden, after 2014, the four non-socialist parties were all in favor of joining NATO. The Social Democratic Party that had to come in, only 1/3 of the voters was in favor of it. So then the Social Democrats didn't act. After Russia's second invasion of Ukraine, all of a sudden 2/3 of the Social Democratic voters were in favor of joining NATO, and then the party leadership listened to their voters and changed position. You can also say that it was a different generation with a new prime minister who was much more sensitive to this matter. And the Sweden Democrats, who had previously been in favor of a certain not-so-gentleman called Putin, they had turned around in 2014 because the Sweden Democrats, who are a very right-wing party, you know, with nicely cut hair, just a long crew cut hair, they had a fight in 2014 because there were two factions on foreign policy. One was in favor of Putin and the other was in favor of Charles XII. And needless to say, the Charles XII faction won, and we were normally not so soft methods. They kicked out all the Putinistas from their party. So therefore, the Sweden Democrats are actually a normal conservative party in foreign policy today, and strongly supportive of Ukraine. So in Sweden, then you had 6 parties in favor of joining NATO, and only the small Greens and Communist parties being against. So that was a pretty easy thing, apart from in the Social Democratic Party, where they had the internal fights, where the old generations, the older 60s in the leadership tended to be against it. But fortunately, there is something called retirement, so it disappeared. And in Finland, it was completely different. So in Finland, there's one person who did it, the former president, Sauli Niinistö. He made a speech on New Year 2023. That is immediately 2 weeks after Putin's statement on how European security should be transformed. And President Niinistö, who's a splendid popular leader, originally center-right, but you can say that he's simply a national leader, he made a speech saying that Finland must be entitled to join NATO if it so desires, not saying that it's so desired. And the Social Democratic Prime Minister Sanna Marin came out straight away and said, we don't want to join NATO. And then President Niinistö sat down and had a private conversation with her. And then they both agreed that, of course, Finland should join NATO. And that came completely from the top. And after the 2 leaders had decided that they should join NATO, they gathered the party groups in the parliament, and happily all but the former Communist Party agreed that they should join NATO, and the former Communist Party was divided half-half. So they went further than the Swedish Communist Party in this regard. And then President Niinistö and Prime Minister Sanna Marin had it all done, and both of them visited Ukraine repeatedly and clarified where they stood. So what did, and Finland got in easily, while Sweden had problems with 2 countries, Turkey and Hungary, which seems, with regard to Turkey, Turkey had real complaints that alleged terrorists were given a too free situation in Sweden. And I think that they had some good arguments. Having worked as a Swedish diplomat, I've seen a bit of what was actually allowed in Sweden. Sweden was very soft on it. Now it was tightened up, as it should be. And Turkey then accepted. Hungary did not have any good arguments at all. It's only that Sweden has complained about the lack of democracy and rule of law repeatedly in Hungary, and Viktor Orban didn't like that. So in the end, he had to give in, and essentially because of US pressure. US pressure was extremely helpful also on Turkey. Finland did not have these problems. And then you wonder, what did Russia do when these 2 countries joined NATO, with reference to the Russians claiming to be against NATO membership for Ukraine? In effect, nothing. There have been extremely few statements in Russia against these 2 countries joining NATO. They have existed, but not of relevance, and Putin has not emphasized it himself. What the Russians have done is that they have done the same trick as they did with regard to Lithuania and Poland, sending refugees from the Middle East and Afghanistan over the border. So Finland, which is a very tough country, they have now closed the border to Russia indefinitely. And I think that's the only way that you can do if you're of Finland, and they have a very long border with Russia, as you're aware of. So where are we now? Denmark is, outside of the Baltics, the biggest donor to Ukraine. And Norway is in the same category. Sweden and Finland are lagging slightly behind, but are substantial donors. We are now arguing that Sweden has to get up to the level of Denmark and Norway. And this has nothing to do with political parties. Norway and Denmark have social democratic prime ministers. Sweden and Finland have now conservative prime ministers. It's a complete unity. So up we stand against Russia and for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your remarks. To me, in a lot of ways, the Nordic-Baltic view on today's Russia is one that I think all NATO members and EU members should follow. And in a lot of ways, they're setting an example. And I do think that the addition of Finland and Sweden to NATO has been a very important geopolitical development in the past year. And so I would say if our other panelists are present online, I would ask them to turn on their cameras. We're running late on time, so if not, okay, great, thank you. So with that, then I'd like to turn to Günther Fellinger, who is an Austrian economist and management development consultant, and he is also a member of the Austrian Committee for NATO membership. And so I'd like to turn the time over to you now. Please do keep your remarks brief.
Thanks a lot. I would like to be as optimistic as Professor Aslund, but unfortunately the situation in Austria and Central Europe is much different. Actually, we see a big counter-strike wave by the Russians, and especially Orban, who is trying to take over several countries in Central Europe and to bring them into his camp, where he's the leader of the pro-Russian camp. So that's very dangerous development, and I call on all in America, don't support Mr. Orban on his endeavor. He has taken over Slovakia now recently. He is actually very influential in Austria right now and trying in the October or September elections to also promote his party friends and build a coalition in his favor. And he's also doing the same in Romania and Croatia. Tomorrow is elections in Croatia, and he is doing the same in the June elections in Romania and also in Bulgaria. So we are in a big crisis in Central Europe, and we need all the help and attention we can get in order to keep the pro-Ukrainian position strong here in this region. But first, I will come to my presentation, and I will also share my screen and show you what I have here prepared. Because first of all, it's very clear everybody should be in NATO. This is the main message I want to give to you. There should be no acceptance from the NATO allies anymore of Austrian neutrality, of Irish neutrality, of Cyprus kind of specific way, Malta. You know, we need to put everybody in NATO, and there must be a big way for an enlargement of NATO in Washington summit. It's a major mistake of the West to accept somehow neutrality, equidistance, this passivity of many of the smaller nations who for some historic reasons are still neutral. And really, this has to end now. Also Switzerland, ultimately also Serbia, and definitely also the Caucasus. All countries must be in NATO. And this is what we should really make as the policy here, and not accept neutrality in any form anymore in Europe. My point about more unity is very clear. I'm also arguing for the euro for everybody. The euro is the right thing for Austria, for example, for many countries. Some countries have not really done this transition, and every new country which has the euro is a really big advantage economically and also in terms of unity. For example, Bulgaria now is delaying the euro introduction because the Russians have been successfully toppling this government coalition. This is a major mistake. So the Czech president at the beginning of the year had made a very good speech, and I was optimistic that Czech Republic will go into the euro. And that's absolutely now also not happening. So we are really delaying the unity of Europe, and that's hurting our enemies. That's hurting us and is serving our enemies. I'm also calling for the euro for Ukraine. This is the right policy. We are in a complicated situation, so we need also to euroize Ukraine. And this has proven as the right policy for Montenegro and Kosovo, and should be also done in Ukraine, and is essential to win. Because I'm speaking to American audience, let me make also a call now ahead of the European elections. In June, we have European elections. We need more unity between the US and the EU, and we need a free trade agreement between the US and the EU. That should be the result of the next mandate of the European Parliament. And this is ultimately, we win this battle with Russia economically, fiscally. So the stronger we are, the more united we are, the easier we will last, and we will succeed in this war with Russia. I call it a war with Russia, and the French president is now also gradually coming to this moment. And I think we all have to face the fact that we are ultimately in a war with Russia. We never wanted it, but we have to win it because Russia is waging a war against us, and we need to mobilize it. I want to shortly answer and enter the question of nuclear weapons, which is basically the ultimate protection of Europe. And we need more American nuclear weapons in Europe. We need a similar process like a double-track nuclear rearmament in '79. And we need definitely not just 100 nuclear weapons of America, but much more. Obviously, I put the number of 1,000. And we need also to put nuclear weapons in Finland, in, of course, Poland, in Romania. And this process is very painful, and it's very necessary as well. Coming to a moment also to the debate about the division of Ukraine, according to the German model, because this was a big debate the last month, I want to remind everybody that there were American troops in Western Germany. There was American nuclear weapons in Western Germany, and they still are there. So if we want to accept and go down that road, let's go with nuclear weapons into Ukraine, and also with American troops. Yeah? Otherwise, it's much better to liberate Ukraine fully and to win this war. When it comes to our enemies, I repeat, we must also have the dismantlement of our enemies as one foreign policy objective. That's very clear. And that's why I support the Free Nations Forum, and I call for ex-Russia. And we have also to work in the same direction towards the dismantlement of Iran, which is a similar hostile power. And we need simply to have a very clear assessment who is our enemy. The CSTO, BRICS, OPEC, and the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Association, and we have the institutions to work against them. We have the OECD, we have the EU, we have NATO. We must believe in our institutions again and enlarge them, and this is the way to win this war institutionally. My last slide here, because I was asked to be short, for all the new nations of Russia and ex-Russia, this is very important. It's my concrete call. Russia until 2022 was a member of the Council of Europe. So it's only logical that all the constituent nations and republics of Russia who are now looking for independence, and which I support, they all have to look for the observer status of the Council of Europe. The human rights and the human rights protection of the Council of Europe was in place for all Russian citizens until basically 2 years ago. So the logic is very clear. You have to form government in exiles who then, and this is my call for a coordinated campaign, everybody from Tatarstan, from Chechnya, from Siberia, all the members of this forum, they have to apply in the next weeks. Yeah, the best would be really tomorrow to Strasbourg, to the Council of Europe, to get observer membership in that council. And the process is important. And the argument is the following. In the past, all the people, all the citizens of the Russian Federation had this status and the protection. So it's just logically that the successor nations to be will also get that status. And this is very important for everybody from the movements. Tomorrow, think how you can write this letter, and let's make a coordinated application that the Secretary General of the Council of Europe is receiving their official letter signed by the ex-exile governments of Tatarstan, Chechnya, and Sakha, and Karelia, wherever, and that this is really the way forward, and this is my call here, and this is the way then to soften the resistance, and also to make it very clear to the politicians of Europe that Russia is breaking up, and the future is all these new nations member of the Council of Europe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are short on time, but I did want to wrap up with a quick two-part question that I'm going to direct to Pavel and Oliver. You both mentioned that your civil society organizations or similar ones to yours could use more support to achieve your goals. Could you speak specifically to what that support would or should look like? And then on the other hand, you talked about that a lot of your efforts are being carried out outside of Russia, but you're also trying to get your messages and themes into Russia. What more can be done to improve messaging to those nations and national movements that are still within today's Russia?
Well, the weak answer is funding. That's the usual one, especially in this city.
Yes, I think actually one of the reasons why for me it was important to attend this forum was it's not even so much funding, but I think it's contacts, transatlantic contacts. There is much talk about transatlantic cooperation on the level of states, kind of intergovernmental, but maybe we should also think more about civil society, transatlantic cooperation, and somehow join forces. When there are like-minded organizations, NGOs, they could be human rights NGOs or political think tanks, maybe like the Jamestown Foundation, whoever identifies themselves as not representing the authorities, not representing necessarily the voice of the state, but somehow voice of some parts of the society. I think that would be really powerful. And maybe in time that could lead to funded projects as well. But I would start with this kind of like a networking perhaps, and confidence and trust building. We also need to trust each other. And that could lead to very good things, I believe.
Great, thank you. And just quickly, what can we do to improve messaging to those groups still within Russia?
Maybe it's the opposite, actually. Maybe we need to listen to them more. I think they're actually doing the messaging. They've been doing it here. 2 weeks ago, there was very strong messaging by them in Estonia at the Free Nations League Congress. Let's listen to those who are already saying something, whether it's the Chechens or Buryats or Bashkirs, and try to support them, but still somehow allow them to lead the way in a way, which maybe is not so intuitive, especially in a place like the United States that is kind of used to maybe manage things a little bit, but maybe it's time to actually listen to those indigenous peoples and follow their lead. How about that?
I would have to agree, and you heard it here first, that these groups need more support from us, and those civil society organizations in the West can do more to partner with these groups and give them more funding. In a lot of ways, that will help these national movements achieve their goals. Thank you. We have a previous panelist who wasn't able to comment that wants to offer some remarks before we turn.
We have Sergei Sumlenny, who is in Germany. He is founder of the European Resilience Center, essential organization providing a lot of assistance to Ukraine, especially in the war effort. Thank you, Sergei, for being with us for so long, for so late.
Thank you, first of all, for having provided me with this opportunity to speak at this event. It's a pleasure. But yeah, I think that it sounds indeed a bit like the breaking of the schedule and like coming back to the previous panel contextually. Especially hard to speak like after the such insightful panel, which we have observed with the distinguished guest. Still, I will try to provide like some insight on what is going on in Germany now regarding the situation we have all discussed during the last two sessions. And looking at Germany, we can say that exactly as in the United States, the German audience has the full-scale discussion of what is the goal of Germany in this war, and is Germany more or less a part of this war? And that is a problem because there is no such goal being defined by any party, which is the part of the ruling coalition in Germany. And we have already seen the attempts of the ruling Social Democratic Party, the party of the Chancellor Olaf Scholz, trying to transform this discussion from winning the war into reaching the peace, and reaching the peace without winning the war, which can sound pretty paradoxical. But in the eyes of the SPD, of the Social Democratic Party of Germany, it looks pretty understandable, as the party is currently in a political crisis. They have only 16%, which is a very low result. Is not enough to win the next elections, which will take place in September 25. So now their rhetorics is targeted those people who want to stop this war immediately without sending weapons, which sounds a bit strange, but not for the German peace movement. So now the rhetoric by the SPD is that the SPD is preventing a nuclear confrontation with Russia. That is why the SPD is not delivering weapons. And the two other parties, as the Greens and the Liberals, who are also the members of the ruling coalition, they publicly oppose this point of view and provide pretty hawkish speeches, but vote when it comes to voting on Ukraine support in accordance to the Social Democratic Party. So practically, Germany delivers to Ukraine a very limited amount of weapons, and mostly focusing on air defense, which is good, and now announced the next delivery of the next Patriot battery, which is very good, but too late. And that is actually the modus in which Chancellor Scholz is working, delivering too late, and then claiming the delivered weapons didn't help to win the war, which is understandable. So despite the fact that currently Germany provides Ukraine with more weapons than the United States, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it was quite a different situation. The US deliveries saved practically Kiev from being taken by the Russians. Now it's the opposite situation. Germany has recently announced another Patriot battery and provides Ukraine with artillery, ammunition, and other weapons. But still, the position of the German government regarding the Russia's government is very ambiguous. The German government tries to avoid the direct confrontation with the Kremlin. The German government doesn't implement direct sanctions. According to the later report of the Ukraine's Center for Defense Reforms, Germany is the third largest supplier of nitrocellulose to Russia, an essential raw material for production of artillery shells. And the German government is very strong opposing the idea of seizing of Russia's strategic assets, which is also not in interest of this policy, is not in interest of providing Ukraine with support. The position of Russian liberals who are in favor of Greater Russia, democratic, but Greater Russia in Germany is pretty strong. Recently, we have seen the start of the public movement supported by leading German media to rename one of streets in Berlin in name of Alexei Navalny, which is, of course, a red flag for many indigenous nations. As we know, the Navalny stands towards the ethnic minorities in Russia. And even if we look in the tiny details, like the continuously operating Russian Center of Rossotrudenchestvo, the Russian foreign propaganda and sabotage organization being sanctioned by the European Union. Its office still operates in Berlin and even offers rooms for Russian bookstores in the center of Berlin. And when the German authority, when the Berlin activists tried to start a legal procedure demanding from the authorities to close this office, as it demands by the European sanctions, they received a rejection with a pretty interesting explanation that such sanctions would lead the Russians to close Goethe Institute in Moscow, a German culture institution which mostly sells German language course. So still a lot of hopes for normalization. No Taurus missiles have been delivered. We know that German companies start to cooperate more and more actively with Russia. We know that 2 German companies cooperate with the Russian authorities, occupation authorities in Mariupol, and providing construction materials for Russian construction operations in Mariupol, which is an absolutely no-go area. Still, 2 German companies deliver construction materials for the Russians. We don't know if the German companies are participating in construction of railway along the occupied territories in Ukraine, leading to occupied Crimea Peninsula, but I would not be surprised if this would happen. And wrapping this up, the picture is pretty dark and not optimistic. Still, we have, in contrast to non-action of the German government, we see a very strong support, according to all polls, among the German population for Ukraine. We see that the number of those Germans who support providing the idea of providing Ukraine with more heavy weapons is increasing. We have now 41% of the Germans saying that they want Ukraine getting more weapons, and another 30% saying they want that the level of delivery of arms to Ukraine remains the same. So 71% of the Germans say that they want Ukraine to be supported militarily by Germany, either on the same level or on a higher level. And that provides a pretty strong hope for those who say, this policy cannot last forever, and there can be some good changes in this policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sergey.